I also have visual perception issues. It's in my brain, not in my eyes. I'm not able to drive because of it. And I feel that whenever I'm out on my walks, I get to notice details that other people get to miss. And I literally get that chance to stop and smell the roses and take those pictures. And if I was somebody who could drive, that would be sad because I would miss so many shots in my life.
Welcome to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie Harrell, your host and the Question Normal coach. This podcast is all about examining our norms. Whether these are societal norms or personal norms, these are the systems, the cycles, and the patterns that are keeping us stuck. They're often keeping us overwhelmed and underfulfilled. So if you're less than excited by the status quo and you're ready to create change, disrupt, and do better, challenging the norms we've all been told will make us happy, asking the questions that we've been conditioned to ignore, and change our lives and our communities for the better in the process, then stick around. As a lifelong questioner and someone who prefers to operate outside of the box, I've designed this space for us to do this together. The disruptor, the cycle breaker, the rebel. Welcome. And now for today's show. Hi, welcome back to New World Normal podcast. It's me, Debbie, your host. Today's conversation, we are speaking with Michelle Steiner, and she is here to generously share her story about what it's been like living with an invisible disability. She shares a bit about her childhood and the challenges she had and how disrupting the norms that society places on someone like Michelle, how disrupting those norms has impacted her life and those around her. It's a very inspirational story, and I hope you enjoy it. Stick around to the end where you can hear takeaways and some reflection points. Enjoy. Welcome back to New World Normal podcast. I'm really excited to have today's conversation with Michelle Steiner. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. Other than this getting back to podcasting, the nervousness came back just like I'm starting from the beginning.
Oh my goodness. Well,
But
you're
that's
doing
good.
good.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
What norm is it that you would like to explore today?
Sure. One of the norms that I would like to explore is that how people with disabilities are perceived. A lot of people will tell me, you don't look like you're disabled. And people don't understand that just because I may not look disabled, that doesn't mean that I don't have a disability.
I feel like that comes up a lot these days for me, even because I was recently
Mhm.
diagnosed with an autoimmune issue. And even though I
Yeah.
present as a healthy bodied person, there are things going on that people can't see. We call it invisible disability. Is that a
Yes.
term you use?
Invisible or hidden. That's another one. Some people might call it that as well.
That makes sense. And you alluded a little bit to why this might be important to you, but can you
Yes.
share a little bit about the reason behind your why this?
Sure, I would be happy to. I was diagnosed with having a learning disability whenever I was in kindergarten. And to my parents, I was, yeah, quote unquote, normal kid that was going to school. I did struggle in preschool, but they weren't really too concerned. My teacher knew something was going on, but during that time, they really didn't have anything like a lot of services, but they knew something was going on. But my parents decided, okay, I'm going to send her to kindergarten. She'll catch up. And I was also the first child, so that was another thing too. They didn't have a whole lot to base on what was typical. And I get into school, and I was very lucky that my teacher saw that I was struggling in the classroom. She really saw me struggle with dot to dot pages, tying my shoes. I couldn't do that, writing my name. And it was also really difficult for me, anything math related. And she picked up on that, and she recommended to my parents that I get tested for having a learning disability. And it came to no surprise to Anybody that I indeed had one, at least with the school staff, they didn't put a name on it, a specific name at that point. They didn't call it dyscalculia. And they didn't know I had limited hand dexterity until I was an adult. But they did know I was not going to be a mathematician whenever I was 5 or 6 years old. That was one thing that we knew for sure.
So they didn't have a name for what you had exactly, but they did know something was about. What year was that?
That had to be the early 80s, maybe mid to early 80s with that. And everybody was so familiar with dyslexia that they didn't know that there was other forms of learning disabilities. They didn't know there was dyscalculia, which I have. They didn't know there was dysgraphia. Nobody talked about things like that. And a lot of what they did, and I was lucky because some of the services and accommodations is what got me through school. And I used a lot of those even when I graduated. But they lumped everybody together that had some kind of atypical thing in one classroom in a learning support. And not everybody had learning disabilities. Some of them I can look back on and I think they had autism. Some of them had some emotional problems on top of that. So it was it was really an experience being in learning support and also being in regular ed was difficult as well.
Yeah, I imagine if they didn't even have the words for it, them finding the proper support was probably a little hit and miss, to say the least.
Yeah, and a lot of the literature that they had when I got older was white men that were in college. And I thought, okay, great. I want to hear about people that go to college. All of them had reading disabilities. So I didn't have a whole lot of people to really be able to relate to and to know what what I was going through was really typical. I didn't find a lot of support definitely until I was an adult, but I didn't even have a possibility of knowing anybody that really struggled with math until I had a student teacher in high school that told me that I could go to college because I knew how to study. And I said, I have a math disability. How am I supposed to do this? And she said, there's people that I go to school with that have disabilities as well. So just hearing a lot of that information. And whenever they diagnosed me as an adult with limited hand dexterity, all the light bulbs went off. We always knew my handwriting was bad. We always knew that I wasn't very coordinated, but it made sense. This is why I can't open locks and doors. This is why things drop out of my hands. It wasn't that I was just simply clumsy or not athletic. I have something that's in my brain that makes it really difficult for me to be able to do that.
It's fascinating how detailed they can get with the disabilities. The first thing that popped in my head when you were talking about like that, all the different, you had mentioned a couple, and I'll have you go back and
Uh-huh.
name some of them. But what I took from what you just said is that one teacher saying, you can do this,
Yep.
shifting your perspective a little. And how did that help you change the trajectory of your life, essentially?
She was the voice that I would hear when I went to college, and it was really difficult that I could do it because I had so many negative voices in my life before that. I had people telling me, "Oh, you can't go to college." That was what a learning support teacher told me before that, and suggested a trade school where nothing interested me. And that wasn't helpful. I had a psychiatrist who told me that I wouldn't go beyond community college. And when I finally got to college, I still had more of those struggles. I still had people, another professor that said I would have limited job choices. And there was still that stigma that was surrounding accommodations. But through all that, I could just hear that voice of that teacher reassuring me, you can do it.
You can do it.
And she made all the difference in my life.
That's amazing. And it's one of my favorite things when I have these conversations, and you could see that one little moment, and all it takes is one person to say something that can change your life. I know it's happened to me a few
Yep.
times, and I can tune into that for myself, and I love seeing it happen in other people's lives as well. I want to go back to the other teacher, the one that told you couldn't do it and was uh, encouraging you to go to trade school. You mentioned that nothing really interested you in trade school. What did interest you? What were the areas that you liked, and what did you want to pursue in college?
I knew that I liked working with people. Especially kids. I knew I wanted to work with children. Maybe originally I thought, okay, a preschool teacher. I even thought maybe a therapist a long time ago because I really like working with students and I really enjoyed that. And I also enjoy creative things too. I always loved to write and I always loved to read. Those were things. So I was always writing stories and reading, and those were things that really interested me in my life. And I can just remember when I did talk with OV Office for Vocational Rehabilitation, they said, that sounds like that's a reasonable plan to go on to school and work with kids. And I knew I couldn't be a certified teacher. And part of that was I've never been a great test taker. And I knew that some classes like math, I probably would not be able to achieve them as much as I wanted to. But what I did was I looked for ways that I could still work in a classroom. I work as a paraeducator today with students that have disabilities. And I love that because I'm still part of a classroom. I'm still helping people. Can't help them with math, but those were the things I was interested in. And if our local vocational program had an early childhood program in their school or something with working with children to prepare me to do what I'm doing now, even if I still went to college afterwards, I would have taken that. But they didn't. They were very they are still very limited towards uh, things such as cosmetology, food. They have a mechanic program, a computer program, and all of these are wonderful things if you have an interest for them. And so many students that I went to school with that were in learning support, all of them went to the vocational training school. And I don't know if any of them found a job in that. And I just have to wonder, was it that learning support teacher feeding them the same narrative that, oh, that college isn't for you? And they decided that, okay, I'm not smart enough. I'm just going to go with what looks like it's going to be easier.
That's a good point. They might not have had that other teacher giving them the encouragement that they could do it. I love that you had a passion that you were able to identify and then you were able to just
Mhm.
keep heading in that direction. I feel like people without learning disabilities struggle with that. The like
Yep.
recognizing what their strengths are and what they love to do and then pursuing that. They get caught up on all the things that they should want to do. So I feel when I encounter people like you who have recognized the pattern and went straight to it, I'm always like, so amazing. Like, how did you do that?
A lot of it was I had a wonderful set of parents that always supported me and they advocated for me and they could see what a lot of my interests were. In fact, when I was really young, my dad found a story I wrote about a dinosaur in second or third grade and said, this is really good. And that just became my world, reading and writing. My dad would read me stories and I would also, when I learned how to read, that became my world and creating little stories and poems. And especially whenever I was bullied in school, that was also a really significant part of my world. That also led me to finding my first writing group whenever I was a teenager, and it was really getting a lot of teasing. And I found friends outside of my school district, and it led me to some other writing groups in the community as well. And when I look at that, I think it was having that interest and parents that were supportive of that. I think it was also finding friends that were of a good influence that were just a couple years older and supporting those things. But my mom and dad also made another thing they did was they held me accountable. I didn't have to have perfect grades, but I had to try and I had to really put forth the effort. And as frustrating as it was, they made me go to school even when I was having problems with a peer, they made me go to school, even when we studied, and they knew I wasn't going to do well on a test. And I just simply had to try my best. And luckily, it really helped me with not having that all that pressure on me to be able to do that. And we also researched a lot of programs that were out there. That's one of the things I'm pretty good at is research. So I look for ones that I knew were going to set me up for success rather than failure. So I found something that I was interested in, I like to do. But I also made sure that it was something that I was able to do, so I could be successful at it. And I just had to find a different way to be able to do it. And it may not have been the normal path that a lot of people had to take, but it worked for me.
It was possible. Did you go to public school, K through 12?
I did. I did. K through 12, went to public school. Yep.
And what were the type of accommodations they would make for you in the K through 12 level?
Sure. I had specialty instruction in the beginning in all areas. And eventually I was able to be in regular ed classes for reading, writing, science, and social studies. And some of the accommodations I had were having the test read aloud to me. I had extended test time. I even had speech therapy for the first 5 years. It was a lot of that. And I was really lucky that a lot of these things worked for me. I was able to be in all regular ed classes except for math by the time I was in high school. And I was doing well in my regular ed classes with the supports. I was making honor roll. I was doing good in with my schoolwork. And a lot of students know how hard they have to work so they can pass. I never knew how hard I had to work because I just knew that I had to work 10 times harder because I was always afraid of failing. And what that really did for me was that boosted my grades and a lot of my teachers said, you're a really good student to do your work, to study, to how to break things down for that. So that really helped me a lot with having those accommodations. And advocacy was just so important too. My parents advocated for me. This was before kids were able to go to their own IEP meetings, and now we have students that can do that. But they would speak up for a lot of those issues as well.
And how did that translate when you got to the college level?
It was up to me to be able to speak up for myself, and that was hard. I can just remember when I was starting out at community college, I didn't really feel comfortable with that. I thought, I don't want that stigma that carries around with accommodations. So I didn't ask for them. And my grades dropped even more. And finally, I had a professor that said, why don't we at least get you extended test time? And I was able to pass her class. And then when I went back to university, that's when I knew how to advocate for myself. I took a few years off of school and I was older and I had maturity. And at this point, I knew that I had an experience already with community college. And I would go up to my professors at the end of whenever it was the beginning of a class. And I would just introduce myself and say, these are the accommodations I'm going to need. And I made sure that I went and used those services on campus, extended test time, a note taker, and tutoring. And I know sometimes there's some parents that I know of, and they have college students with disabilities, and sometimes they get mad at the school because the professor won't accommodate them, but the student isn't up there advocating for themselves. And I think that's so important when a kid, even if they'll always be your child, but whenever they go to college, that's up to them to be able to speak up and to say that. And nobody can read your mind, and you have to be able to do that. And in doing that, I was able to do even better than I did when I first started a community. My grades improved, I made Dean's List, and I was able to graduate with a bachelor's degree. And if I never spoke up for myself, I wouldn't be successful. And I even carry that at my job. I have to be the one that goes and talks to the teachers or the staff that I work with and say, I can't help the kids with math. And because people automatically they can't read my mind. They can't see that I can't do it. So it's important to be able to speak up and advocate for yourself.
I agree. But it's so hard to do. And part of
Yep.
it is that admitting that you need help. I feel like
Yep.
people want to be perceived as normal and capable, but I'm like, even if you need help, that doesn't mean that's part of my quest of dismantling this idea of normal, because just because you're other abled, like you said, you're really good at reading and writing, you just have trouble with math. Getting okay with asking for help. I feel like it's something that we all struggle with, and normalizing it, that
Yep.
it's okay. And I know from our pre-interview conversation, you talked about the bullying and then the stigma when you got to the next level,
Yep.
bullying in grade school and high school. And then you get to the next level and you're like, I don't want to other myself right out of the gate. I appreciate that when you said, when you took the break and you came back with more maturity and you knew if I wanted to finish this successfully, I'm going to have to ask for help. And that came with the maturity. So, how might we support younger people in advocating for themselves?
One of the first things I do, I work with seventh graders, and I really encourage them to advocate and speak up for themselves. That I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to do is to encourage them to do that. I have sometimes I might have a student that comes in and they're really struggling in a class. And I'll say, did you talk to your teacher? In fact, I had a student today that couldn't understand why she had missing assignments. And I said, you're going to have to go up to your teacher. You're going to have to talk to her and see what she's saying about these missing assignments because I'm not in the room. So I don't know what to say. And I've had students that were afraid to ask for help. And I say, I'll go with you. And I can remember with the student, and that girl wasn't afraid afterwards to ask for help. She could speak up for herself. And I think that's just important because so many of our students are going to graduate, all of them are going to graduate. They're going to leave us someday. But for a lot of them, their disability is going to stay with them. So it's really important that they know what their disability is and how to be able to speak up for themselves and how to advocate. And it's never easy the first time around. I had to learn through a lot of mistakes with that. But every single time you do it, you get better at it.
And I'm thinking of the reverse also. If someone comes to you and
Uh-huh.
says they need these accommodations, being more aware that this is a thing and it's not
Yep,
unusual or
exactly.
so you alluded to what you do for work, but we haven't talked about that yet.
Yes.
So
Sorry.
you were successful in navigating public school and then went on to community college
Uh-huh.
and then finished at a university. Where did you end up getting your degree?
I got my associates in early childhood education at Butler County Community College, and then I got my bachelor's in community programming for Americans with Disabilities at Slippery Rock University
Amazing. And now what are you doing
here.
for work?
I work in a school. Yeah. I work in a school as a paraeducator with students who have disabilities and some who don't. A large percentage of my students, they are in a regular ed classroom and a general ed room for a lot of their classes. They switch for their classes. And then they have a learning support room that they come into where we go over and material. We work on getting work done, finishing up tests. And sometimes I might be helping a student with just, they may not get the concept of what the teacher is teaching. So I might just help to review the information, encourage them how to advocate for themselves. That's another big part of the job. Sometimes it can be organizing backpacks. I do that. And then on the side, I also am a writer and a speaker and a photographer. So I have a blog called Michelle's Mission where I write about my life with a learning disability. And I get to feature my photography on my walks because I also have visual perception issues. It's in my brain, not in my eyes. I'm not able to drive because of it. And I feel that whenever I'm out on my walks, I get to notice details that other people get to miss. And I literally get that chance to stop and smell the roses and take those pictures. And if I was somebody who could drive, that would be sad because I would miss so many shots in my life.
I just wanted to take a moment, let that sink in for everybody. That reframe is beautiful. Instead of seeing the lack of, I can't drive, I can't go, you're looking at what you do get instead, which is the opportunity to take things slowly and smell the roses. I have a 15-year-old dog who I've been trying to do that reframe instead of getting frustrated that we're walking so slow, remind myself like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to take things slow and notice little things like the bumblebee. So you're able to capture those in photographs and share on your blog.
Yes, I share a lot of them on my blog, and I have a little store where people can purchase prints. And I also tie a lot of nature into my blog entries. Sometimes I might talk about a flower blooming, and that's how I accept my disability. or I might talk about the transformation that a butterfly goes through. And that's been something that I go through. And I try to put things in simple terms that people can understand, especially people that have other ones that have disabilities. And I use the nature analogy with that as well.
Love it. How has nature been helpful for you?
I think part of it's helpful is I can see a lot of things like there are things that it's always changing, it's always evolving. And I think that sometimes that gives me some analogies that I'm changing, I'm evolving with along that. I can also just see the different variations in nature and how those things work together rather than against that. And sometimes that can be something that I look at, and that could be an example of how humans can live too, or people with disabilities. And there's just those differences, and it's about working together with them rather than working in opposition.
Yeah, I love the idea of nature being a bridge of commonality. No matter how different we might all seem to be, which
Mhm.
I'm a firm believer that we're a lot more alike than we like to believe, but you rarely find people that are gonna be like, "Ooh, nature." Even people that don't like camping or like hiking, they still can appreciate a beautiful sunset or
Yes,
a flower.
right. I am not a camper. That is my husband, but we both love to go on walks, and we love to go and visit gardens and see a lot of that stuff and the sunset. And that brings us together too.
I, of course, had a question, but then got sidetracked with the idea of nature and the slow walks. So, as far as the support for your students, now that you're actually able to be a support system for students that might be similar to how you were growing up,
Uh-huh.
how do you see that support system changing from when you were a kid to now?
I think some of the ways that I've seen it change is we have a lot more awareness now of disabilities. Before, we just didn't have a lot of early intervention programs. And so I've really seen that change. I've also seen where we now want to have students uh, do less time in maybe a learning support classroom that I grew up with. We want to have them more with their peers that don't have disabilities. That's another thing that really has changed a lot. And I think a lot of times advocacy, now parents are more advocates for their child. They know what services are out there. And a lot of our parents are very empowered when they go into meetings, and so are our students.
And what about when you look forward? Do you see anything that you would like to improve, or are there anything on the horizons that you might be a little concerned about?
Sure. One of the things I would love to see improve is to have a customized approach to education and transition planning. I think a lot of times our children, they have a lot of services while they're in school, as they should. They have a lot of help and a lot of resources. But when a child turns 18 and they graduate, a lot of the programs that are for people, there's not a lot out there for people with disabilities in general. And some of the ones that are out there are very cookie cutter. It does not give a lot of ways that maybe somebody's unique. It doesn't give a customized approach. And I think that sometimes that is what somebody really needs, is to have that customized approach rather than just putting a rubber stamp on it and saying, okay, your test scores say you're not going to go to college. It's saying, okay, what programs are out there? What resources are there? How can I help you to be successful uh, with what you're going to do with your life? Because I can even remember when I was out of college and we were trying to find a job, and I went with a job program for people that had disabilities. And I can remember I was working some temp jobs, and I would go into the place, and they would have me circling jobs in the newspaper. And I'm thinking, I can do this at home. And if I had a job interview, they're like, can we go with you to support you? And I'm thinking, no, I can go to these job interviews myself. And I later found out that when we had an event, there was people that came and they had intellectual disabilities. So a lot of the programming was catered more to somebody that would have an intellectual disability rather than having a learning disability. And there's nothing wrong with that. That serves their population in a more effective way. but there just wasn't that customized approach. Sometimes I think they didn't know what to do with me when I was on the program. I would have a report from the psychiatrist that would show it was pretty dire in one area or pretty bad. And then they would look, but then I would be able to graduate and have a degree and have a job. And they just didn't know how to customize what I was doing. In fact, my mom goes, I think you're doing better on your own than with some of these services.
It sounds like it because they weren't set up for somebody like you. And
Right.
I think that we're all individuals. I feel like that's
Yep.
with abilities, disabilities, other abled, like whatever you want to
Right.
label it, finding the right kind of support for the person is key, and it only benefits all of us, right? The society as a whole. If we can find the right spot and the right way to support this person so that they can have success and grow up to be a happy,
Yep.
thriving member of the community, that's important for everybody.
Great.
So yeah, how do we make that happen?
I think one of the ways is we listen to people. I think that's so key because sometimes we might hear something that somebody says, but do we really listen? We might think, because I can remember when I was at college, I had a friend or somebody that told me, I think if you just got your act together, you could become an elementary school teacher. And I knew that wasn't the right course of action for me. But it's that listening and saying, no, I don't think that's the right course of action for myself. Maybe other people can do that. So I think listening's a big part. I think it's also sharing resources. Sometimes that's one of the blessings that has come up with social media and the internet. We can now look at programs that maybe other places are offering and maybe what some things are that somebody else might have, and we can say, okay, maybe I'll consider doing one of those resources. And I think it's also that connecting with other people that have that too. That was another blessing with social media. I got to meet other people that have my disability, and I got to find there's other people out there. So I think connecting, listening, and finding the resources that work and just suggesting it to maybe to other people and looking for ways that we can offer quality programming too. I think that's another thing that is definitely something too. What's something that might work for somebody? And it's even better if we can find something that not only works for the person with a disability, but that can work for other people as well.
I was just going to say, when you get all the students working together
Yep.
and they're all feeling supported, that too is just going to benefit
Yep.
us all. So we all need to learn how to work together. Like you were talking about
Yep.
the younger students being able to advocate for themselves because they're going to have to go out into the world and support, but
Right.
also the reverse of us becoming more aware of these challenges so that when we
Right.
encounter someone that's got a learning disability or other in the public, out in the
Right.
wild, like it's not so foreign or, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do
Right.
I? Because I think most people want to do the right thing and want to respond with kindness and compassion, but we're just unsure. And a lot of people get afraid to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. I want to touch on a few things you said. You had
Sure.
mentioned earlier when you were sharing your story, how important community is and how you were able to find a community of people that were a little bit older outside of your normal peer group to help when you were feeling bullied in school. And you mentioned again the being able to find community now on social media and that blessing.
Right.
I feel like it's so huge for all of us to be able to find the people that have similar thoughts to us, like-minded individuals, or similar interests, or similar passions to help us not feel so out of place or that square peg trying to fit in the round hole. Oh, wait, no, there are other square pegs out here. Yay. And I
Right.
agree. It is social media gets a lot of bad rap, but that aspect of it is when you're able to connect with people from all over the world
Right.
and find that commonality is pretty special.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you can find different people that you have those interests with, and you can talk to different people that have that. That's one of the good things about it. Yep,
Yeah,
I
and you were
agree.
fine. When did you finally get a name for what it was that, how old were you when that?
I was in my 30s when, and the
Wow.
interesting thing is they didn't, they still don't classify it necessarily as dyscalculia. They put math handicapped or math disability on there, specific learning disability, excuse me. And that is what I looked up is dyscalculia. So that is the math learning, the math type. I didn't even know that had a name until into my 30s.
Interesting. And then you mentioned the motor
Yeah.
dexterity.
Yes, now that had the name. Yeah, that's whenever I was in my 30s as well. Yeah, it was a funny story actually getting diagnosed with that. Because I was going to go back to grad school, so I had to have the documentation of supports I would need. And spoiler alert, grad school didn't work out for me getting in. But one of the things we found was that with the hand dexterity, it's when you go in for a psych evaluation, it's 8 hours for learning support. And I can remember I was ordering lunch. I ordered it beforehand, and they blindfolded me, and they were having me put shapes in the shape sorter. And just as I was doing this, the lunch came, and the delivery person I had to come in and sign my name blindfolded. And I just thought, well, what is that delivery person even thinking? What's going on here? Here I am blindfolded. That was funny.
You didn't have to eat your lunch blindfolded, did you?
No, after that point, after I was done, they let me take a break for lunch. But no, and it's also amazing. The other part of that testing too was they would, I couldn't look, but they would touch my finger and I'd have to figure out which finger are they touching, like with a pencil. And I didn't have awareness on really what finger they were touching. And that was another part of that. And that's sensory part too. So
Fascinating.
it was just,
But also,
yeah.
I have to comment that the assessment is 8 hours long. That's a
They
long
do
time.
different I know they do a battery of different things that involves seeing how well you do math, which I already know the story of how well I'm going to do on that. But they'll see like your reading, your recall on just how much you can recall. Like they'll do a block pattern test. They'll do tests where you'll draw like a picture of a person. And they'll ask you questions to see what your knowledge, your general knowledge is.
I wonder if
Yeah.
they pay attention to the length of the assessment being 8 hours, if the tests later
Yeah,
in the afternoon tend to be worse, because I'm like, that's a long time to focus and concentrate.
it is a very long time to be able to do that, to focus in on that. And I have not gone through one of them where they've come back and said, I don't have a disability. It's always the same, you have this. And yeah, it's a very long test. And they tell you don't have to stay for the 8 hours, but then you have to come back and you're just like, I just want to get done.
Get it over with. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
How many times have you had to do that throughout your life?
As a kid, I can't keep track of how many times because there were certain times where we had to do recertifications and testing. It was every few years. As an adult, I had about 3 or 4 of them.
Okay.
And after the last one, I was like, okay, we got the answers we need, and this is yeah,
Yeah, we've got
yeah,
enough labels and boxes.
yeah,
I'm fine with that.
exactly.
We'll just
We got the
carry
answers
on.
we need. Yeah,
I love the idea that you're now supporting kids.
yep.
It's a great full
I
circle
love it.
moment. What are some of the most common misconceptions or stereotypes that you encountered or you've seen the kids that you now support encounter, and how would you like to
Sure.
disrupt those?
One of the most common stereotypes is people will say, "Oh, you have a learning disability. You must not be able to learn." And that's untrue. I'm able to learn. I just need a different way to be able to do that. And I'm capable of it. There's just sometimes we haven't found ways to do certain things. For example, my dad has always said that I probably can learn how to do math. We just haven't found the right way to be able to teach you. And there just hasn't been that effective strategy. Despite everything, I still can't read the face of a clock and I confuse my life from right from my left, but I find ways to be able to compensate with that. But there's things I can do really well. I'm good with reading, I'm good with writing, and I can learn. It's just we have to find a way around that. I think another common myth that I hear a lot of times is, oh, you don't look like you're disabled. And I have to explain to people that sometimes we have disabilities that we can see, and sometimes there's disabilities that might be hidden.
As far as the label disability, like you say you have
Uh-huh.
a learning disability, are you comfortable with that label, or would you prefer people use a different?
I am comfortable with using the word disability because my parents explained that to me from the time I was a very small child, that I have a learning disability and I learn differently. And hearing that information was really powerful for me because I had it took a little while to sink in, but my peers were telling me that I wasn't smart and I wasn't able to do things. But my mom and dad just emphasized what it was. And I grew up with hearing the word disability isn't a bad thing. It's not a dirty word. And I know there's people that like using the words differently abled, and if they choose to describe it as that way, then that's totally up to them as well. But I'm comfortable with the term disability. I don't think it necessarily means that I can't do anything. There's certain things that just may not be possible for me, and that's okay. But I'm not disabled in every single area of my life. It's just when I encounter math or driving, those are just some of the areas where we can try, but those just may not work out to what society might consider success. But oftentimes, what I consider success in my life and what society does are two different things.
You and me both. And I think that's probably true of a lot of the labels that we use. It's not necessarily the label, but it's more the stigma and the assumptions that are
Yep,
attached to that. So if we can move away from making assumptions by everyone that uses that label, maybe we won't have to change the way we describe things every 6 months. It's what it seems like in the last few
exactly.
years. We've mentioned several times in our conversation at times that you didn't necessarily do things the quote unquote normal way. You didn't take the normal path that was maybe expected of you or laid out in front of you. And how has that made the difference for you in your life and then in the people that you encounter in your life?
I think it made a difference in me because things didn't turn out maybe how I expected them to turn out, but they turned out so much better in my life. And a lot of those setbacks and a lot of those things that I thought, wow, this is really bad, or what good can ever come out of this? And something greater even came out of that. I can remember I had a friend when I moved back home, and I was disappointed that things didn't quite work out. And she goes, "Did you pray about it?" And I'm like, yeah, it upset me for so long. And then I realized, yeah, there was something better out there. And that was just God giving me something even better. And I always like to think people have always said things that I couldn't do, and God had other plans in my life that turned out a lot better. So I think that was a big thing. And I think sometimes going through a lot of that has given me empathy. I know not what every one of my students is going through. I'm not inside their head for everything, but I can, there's some common themes that when I was in school that still exist today. I hear a lot of students say they hate their disability, they hate their individual education plan, and I can be that voice that goes in there and tells them it's not a bad thing to have a disability, and it's not a bad thing to have an individual education plan. And that's not something that I had someone be able to do in my life until I was a lot older. And I just get to be that encouraging voice and the person that I wish I had when I was in seventh grade.
I love that. So those kids are so lucky to have you with this lived experience and can empathize with them on a level that a lot of their teachers probably can't. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about as we're getting toward the end of our time together?
I just love to encourage people that success doesn't always come in the package that you expect, but sometimes it comes in something even better.
And how, if anybody wants to connect with you or find your blog, how we'll of course put it in the show notes, but if people want to listen to it.
Sure. Sure. You can find me at my blog, www.mrsmichellesmission.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This has been lovely. And I'm going
Thank
to,
you so much. It's been a pleasure.
well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. A few takeaways that I know I will be reflecting on for the foreseeable future. are the assumptions we make when we hear somebody is living with a disability. What are some of our biases and some of the ways we think they shouldn't behave, they are going to behave? Another thing that I loved is her reframe of some of the challenges she faces, like not being able to drive. Instead of getting hung up on what she can't do, she celebrates what she's able to do. The fact that she's walking from place to place and taking it a little slower and able to be in nature and notice little things on her walk, and then sharing it with her community. But I think probably one of the most important things she mentioned was listening, to actually hearing what people have to say and to work on understanding. I think we can all benefit from doing that a little bit more. Head to our website. Let me know what you thought about this conversation. If you have suggestions for others, and then be sure to go follow Michelle and check out her blog. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the New World Normal podcast. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Hope you enjoyed what you heard today. And if you did, feel free to head over to Apple or Spotify and leave us a review. It's a very easy way to help us get the word out about the show. And if there is anyone in your life who might benefit from hearing the information that we shared today, please send them this episode. Let's get the word out that normal isn't always better. A lot of times it's what's keeping us overwhelmed and underfulfilled. Let's keep questioning it together. Thanks again.